There are moments in farming that look like victory from the outside. A winning bid, a handshake, a machine rolling onto your trailer under an October sky. But victory has a half-life in agriculture. What looks like progress in the moment can quietly become its opposite when you measure it against the years that follow. This is a story about a combine, a Case IH 2388 to be specific. Red paint, rotary system, the kind of machine that could change a man's business if the business was ready to be changed. It sold at auction on a Saturday afternoon in western Tennessee in October 2006. The hammer came down at $78,000. The buyer was a black man named Raymond Crawford, 41 years old, who ran a custom harvesting operation out of a town called Whiteville. He'd been saving for 3 years. He'd driven 2 hours to be there. He'd won. But winning and gaining ground are not always the same thing. Raymond had been custom harvesting since 1998. That meant he didn't farm his own land. He owned the equipment and sold the service. During wheat season, he'd run a 1985 Case IH 1660 combine through fields owned by other men, charging by the acre, corn and soybeans in the fall. It was hard work. The margins were thin, but it was his. He had 3 steady contracts when he started. By 2006, he was down to 1. The 1660 was the problem. It was 21 years old. It broke down often. Raymond could fix most things himself, but reliability wasn't something you could weld back together. Farmers didn't want to wait while you replaced a feeder chain in the middle of their harvest window. They didn't care that you'd been running that machine since before they knew your name. They wanted the job done fast, done clean, done now. And if you couldn't deliver that, they'd find someone who could. Raymond knew he needed a newer machine. Not new. He couldn't afford new, but newer. Something from the late 90s or early 2000s. A Case IH 2388 was the model he had in mind. It was an upgrade from the 1660 in every way that mattered. More horsepower, better capacity. The rotary system was proven. If he could get his hands on one in decent shape, he believed he could win back the contracts he'd lost. Maybe even expand. There were farmers in Hardman County who still didn't know his name. A reliable machine would give him the chance to introduce himself properly. He started watching auctions in the summer of 2006. There was one in Jackson, one in Brownsville, nothing in his price range. Then he heard about an estate sale near Bolivar. A farmer named William Harold had passed in July. The family was selling everything. The listing included a 2001 Case IH 2388 combine with just under 1,800 hours. Raymond circled the date. Saturday, October 14th. He cleared his schedule. He told his wife, Claudette, he was going to come home with that machine, or he wasn't coming home until he had a plan for the next one. The auction was held on the Harold family farm, a sprawling property just south of Bolivar, with machine sheds that looked like they'd been painted the year before. Raymond arrived at 7 in the morning. Registration didn't start until 8. But he wanted to see the equipment up close before the crowd came. He walked through the rows of tractors and grain carts and field cultivators, taking notes in a small spiral pad he kept in his chest pocket. The 2388 was parked near the back of the main shed. He spent 30 minutes looking it over. The paint was faded in places, but the machine was clean. The tires had life left. He climbed into the cab and sat in the operator's seat, running his hands over the controls. It felt right. At 8, he walked to the registration table and gave his name. A woman with reading glasses on a chain handed him a bidder card. Number 147. She didn't make eye contact. Raymond thanked her and walked back toward the equipment. By 9, the lot was full. Trucks with dealer plates, farmers in Carhartt jackets and caps with seed company logos. A few men Raymond recognized from other auctions, no one he'd call a friend. The auctioneer started with smaller items, tool chests, a welder, a hydraulic jack. Raymond stood near the edge of the crowd and watched. The auctioneer was a white man in his 50s with a voice that carried without a microphone. He worked fast. He made eye contact with bidders as he called out numbers. He pointed, he nodded. He had a rhythm. Raymond noticed something early. When a white bidder raised a card, the auctioneer saw it immediately. He'd acknowledge it with a quick point or a verbal confirmation. But when Raymond raised his card during a bid on a grain auger, the auctioneer's eyes swept past him. Raymond raised it higher. The auctioneer kept calling. Another man across the lot raised his card. The auctioneer pointed at him. Sold. Raymond told himself it was the angle. Maybe the sun was in the auctioneer's eyes. Maybe he was standing too far back. The combine came up just after noon. The auctioneer climbed onto the platform beside the machine and started his pitch. He listed the hours. He mentioned the maintenance records. He said the Harold family had taken care of their equipment, and this 2388 was proof of that. He opened the bidding at $50,000. Raymond raised his card. The auctioneer didn't call it. He kept talking. He gestured toward the combine's features. The rotary system, the grain tank capacity. He said it was a machine that could handle 1,500 acres a season without complaint. Then he looked out at the crowd and said, "Who'll give me 50? A man in a green jacket near the front raised his card. The auctioneer pointed. 50. I got 50. Now 55. Who'll go 55? Raymond raised his card again, higher this time. He made sure it was visible above the heads in front of him. The auctioneer looked right past him. Another bidder raised. The auctioneer called it. 55, now 60. Who'll give me 60? Raymond kept his card up. He didn't lower it. He stood completely still, his arm extended, his face neutral. He could feel people glancing at him. The auctioneer kept calling numbers. 60, 65, 70. Each time Raymond's card was in the air. Each time the auctioneer acknowledged someone else first. At 72,000, there was a pause. The auctioneer scanned the crowd. His eyes moved across the lot. They landed on Raymond for half a second, then moved past. He called for 75. No response. He waited. The pause stretched. Raymond's card was still up. The auctioneer said 72 going once. Raymond didn't move. 72 going twice. A man to Raymond's left raised his card. The auctioneer's hand shot out. 75, I got 75, now 80. Who'll go 80? Raymond raised his card and called out, 80. His voice cut through the lot. The auctioneer stopped. He looked directly at Raymond for the first time. There was a beat of silence. Then the auctioneer nodded. 80. I got 80 from 147. The man in the green jacket raised again. 82. Raymond countered. 85. The green jacket paused. The auctioneer gave him time. He leaned toward him slightly. He said, "You're at 82, sir. Do I hear 85? The man shook his head. The auctioneer turned back to Raymond. 85 with 147. Do I hear 87? Another man raised. 87. Raymond went to 90. The second man raised again. 92. Raymond raised his card without hesitating. 95. The auctioneer paused again. He looked at the second bidder. He gave him a long moment. The man finally shook his head. The auctioneer looked at Raymond. 95,000 with 147. Do I hear 97? Silence. 95 going once. The auctioneer's eyes moved slowly across the crowd. He made eye contact with several men. He waited. 95 going twice. Raymond could feel his pulse in his throat. A man near the back raised his card. The auctioneer pointed immediately. 97. I got 97. Raymond raised. 100. The auctioneer called it. The man countered. 102. Raymond raised his card. 105. The man hesitated. The auctioneer didn't give him extra time this round. He called. 105 going once, going twice. The man raised. 107. Raymond raised his card and said, 110. The auctioneer looked at the other man. He waited. The man shook his head and lowered his card. The auctioneer turned to Raymond. 110,000 from 147. Do I hear 112? No one moved. 110 going once. The lot was quiet. Raymond kept his card in the air. 110 going twice. The auctioneer's gavel hovered. Then a voice from the side called out. A man Raymond hadn't seen before. 115. The auctioneer's head snapped toward him. He pointed. 115, I got 115. Raymond raised his card immediately. 120. The auctioneer acknowledged it without pause this time. The momentum had shifted. The side bidder raised again. 122. Raymond countered. 125. The side bidder paused. The auctioneer waited. Not long. Just enough. The man shook his head. The auctioneer looked back at Raymond. 125,000. Do I hear 127? Nothing. 125 going once. Raymond lowered his card but kept his eyes on the auctioneer. 125 going twice. A man in a white shirt near the machinery shed raised his card. The auctioneer pointed. 127. Raymond felt something tighten in his chest. He raised his card. 130. The man in the white shirt raised again without waiting. 135. Raymond raised his card. 140. The man looked at him for the first time. He raised again. 145. Raymond didn't hesitate. 150. The auctioneer called it. The man in the white shirt stared at Raymond for a long moment. Then he lowered his card and walked away. The auctioneer scanned the crowd one last time. 150,000 from 147. Do I hear 152? Silence. 150 going once, going twice. The gavel came down. Sold to bidder 147 for $150,000. Raymond walked to the payment table with his checkbook. His hands were steady, but his mind was racing. He'd planned to spend 70,000, maybe 80 if the machine was worth it. He just committed to 150. That was nearly double. It was everything he'd saved. It was more than the 2388 was worth at market value. He knew that, but he also knew what it had taken to win that bid. Every time he'd raised his card, he'd had to fight to be seen. Every time the auctioneer had paused, it had given other bidders time to think, time to counter, time to drive the price higher. He wrote the check. The woman at the table processed it without comment. She handed him a receipt and said the combine would be released once the funds cleared. Raymond folded the receipt and walked back to his truck. He didn't feel like he'd won. He felt like he'd survived. The 2388 was delivered to his property 3 days later. Raymond spent the rest of October going over every inch of it. He changed the oil, he greased the fittings, he tested the systems. The machine ran well. It was worth 70,000, maybe 75 in good market conditions. He'd paid 150. He told himself it didn't matter. The machine would pay for itself. He'd win back his contracts. He'd expand. The math would work if he worked hard enough. But the math required time, and time required opportunity. Raymond called his old clients in November, the farmer in Hardman County who dropped him in 2004, the operation in Fayette County that had switched to a bigger outfit in 2005. He told them he had a newer machine now. A 2388, reliable, ready. He could start next season if they wanted to talk terms. The Hardman County farmer said he'd already signed with someone else. The Fayette County operation didn't return his calls. Raymond tried new contacts. He drove to farms he'd never worked before. He introduced himself. He left his number. Most said they'd think about it. A few said they'd call if something opened up. No one called. By spring 2007, Raymond had one contract, the same contract he'd had before he bought the combine. A farmer named Ed Perkins who owned 300 acres near Whiteville. Ed was in his 70s. He'd been using Raymond's services since 1999. He didn't care what kind of machine Raymond drove, as long as the work got done. Raymond harvested Ed's wheat in June and his soybeans in October. The 2388 performed exactly as it should. No breakdowns, no delays. Raymond charged his standard rate, $18 an acre. Ed paid on time. Raymond did the math in December. With Ed's 300 acres twice a year, he'd brought in $10,800. His loan payment on the combine was $15,000 a year. That left him $4,200 short before he even counted fuel, maintenance, insurance, or the cost of feeding his family. He took a part-time job at a feed mill in Jackson. 40 miles round trip, 4 days a week. It covered the gap, barely. In 2008, Ed Perkins passed away. His son took over the farm and hired a custom crew out of Bolivar. Raymond lost his last contract. He spent the next 2 years looking for work. He put ads in the local paper. He talked to every farmer he knew and several he didn't. He undercut his competitors on price. He offered guarantees. Nothing worked. The custom harvesting business in western Tennessee was tightly held. The operators who had contracts kept them. The farmers who needed services already knew who they were calling. Raymond's name wasn't on that list. By 2010, the Case IH 2388 had sat unused for 18 months. Raymond couldn't afford to let it go. He owed too much. He couldn't afford to keep it either. It was depreciating in his shed while he made payments on a loan that would take another 8 years to clear. He started taking any farm work he could find. Day labor during planting season, fence repair, bush hogging, equipment repair for farmers who didn't want to pay dealer rates. The work was inconsistent. Some months were good. Some months he made $300. He kept the feed mill job. He kept making payments on the combine. Claudette asked him once why he didn't just sell it. Take the loss and move on. Raymond didn't have an answer that made sense out loud. The combine wasn't just a machine. It was proof that he'd tried. It was proof that he'd been there, that he'd raised his card, that he'd won. Selling it would mean admitting that none of that had mattered, so he kept it. The years stacked quietly. 2011, 2012, 2013. Raymond turned 50. His back started bothering him after long days on his feet. The feed mill cut his hours. He picked up weekend shifts at a hardware store in Bolivar. He still did odd jobs on farms when they came up, but they came up less often. Younger men with newer equipment were easier to find. The combine sat in the shed. Raymond started it once a month to keep the engine from seizing. He walked around it sometimes, running his hand along the red paint that had faded to dull rust in places. He thought about the auction. He thought about the auctioneer's eyes moving past him. He thought about the pauses, the extra time given to other bidders, the way the price had climbed every time he'd had to fight to be acknowledged. He wondered what would have happened if the auctioneer had called his bids when he raised his card the first time, if there had been no delays, if he'd been seen the way the others were seen. The combine might have sold for $75,000, maybe $80,000. He would have won it with money left over. He could have weathered the loss of Ed's contract. He could have bid on other equipment when it came up. He could have stayed in the game. But that wasn't what happened. In 2014, Raymond finally paid off the loan. The combine was his, free and clear. It had cost him $150,000 plus 8 years of interest. Total outlay, just over $200,000. He'd used it for one season. 600 acres, $10,800 in revenue. He didn't sell it. He thought about it. Claudette brought it up again, but Raymond couldn't let it go. It had cost too much. Not just in money, in time, in effort, in the weight of standing in that auction lot with his card in the air, waiting to be seen. The combine became something other than a tool. It became a monument, not to success, to the gap between effort and outcome, to the distance between what a man is willing to pay and what he's able to gain. Raymond kept working, the hardware store, occasional farm jobs. In 2016, he had a heart episode. Not a full attack, enough to slow him down. He cut back his hours. Claudette took a job at the county clerk's office. They made it work. The custom harvesting business Raymond had imagined in 2006 never materialized. The contracts never came back. The expansion never happened. The 2388 never paid for itself. It never came close. By 2020, Raymond was 65. He was still doing small equipment repairs out of his garage, but his hands weren't as steady as they'd been. He had a dozen regular customers, farmers who trusted him, who knew he'd do the work right. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The combine was still in the shed. Raymond thought about that auction sometimes. He thought about the moment the gavel came down. He'd felt something close to triumph then. He'd won. He'd outbid everyone. He'd taken that machine home. But winning a bid and winning the opportunity to use what you've won are not the same thing. The combine had never opened doors. It had never brought the contracts he'd imagined. It had only proven that he could pay more than something was worth and still end up with less than he'd started with. The machine wasn't the problem. The machine had done exactly what it was built to do. It had run clean. It had performed. It had waited, ready for work that never came. The problem was everything around the machine. The delays that drove up the price, the calls that were never returned, the contracts that were always already filled, the quiet, unspoken understanding that some men had access and some men didn't, and no amount of money or effort could change which side of that line you stood on. Raymond walked out to the shed on a cold morning in November 2024. He was 70 now. His knees hurt, his back hurt. He moved slower than he used to. He stood in front of the 2388 and looked at it the way he'd looked at it 18 years earlier in Bolivar. The paint was worse now. The tires were cracked. The cab glass had a thin layer of dust that caught the morning light. He climbed into the operator's seat. He sat there for a long time. He didn't start the engine. He just sat. Claudette found him there an hour later. She didn't ask what he was doing. She'd stopped asking years ago. She just stood in the doorway and waited. Raymond climbed down slowly. He walked past her without speaking. She followed him back to the house. That night, she asked him if he ever regretted it, buying the combine, paying what he paid, holding on to it all these years. Raymond thought about it. He thought about the auction, the card in his hand, the auctioneer's eyes, the pauses, the price climbing, the moment the gavel fell. He said he didn't regret buying it. He regretted believing that owning it would be enough. The Case IH 2388 is still in Raymond's shed. It has 4,200 miles on the odometer. 1,800 of those miles were on it the day he bought it. The rest he put on driving it from the auction site to his property, moving it around his lot, and running it once a month to keep it alive. The machine is worth $12,000 now, maybe $15,000 if someone needs parts. Raymond has never listed it for sale. He's never put a sign on it. He's never mentioned it to the equipment dealers who sometimes call looking for used iron. People ask him sometimes why he keeps it. He tells them it still runs. He tells them he might need it someday. He tells them it's paid for. He doesn't tell them what it cost. Not in money. Money is just numbers. You can write numbers down. You can add them up. You can see where they went. The other costs don't show up on paper. The contracts that never came. The business that never grew. The years spent working jobs that weren't the job he'd wanted. The slow, quiet recognition that the machine in his shed represented the distance between what he'd been willing to do and what he'd been allowed to become. Raymond is 70 now. He still does small repairs. He still starts the combine once a month. He still walks out to the shed and stands in front of it, looking at the red paint and the rotary system and the cab where he once sat and imagined a different future. The 2388 isn't a tool anymore. It's a marker, a boundary stone. It shows exactly how far effort can take you when the systems around you are designed to measure effort differently depending on who's making it. Raymond raised his card. He was seen eventually. He won the bid. He paid the price. He brought the machine home, and it has cost him ever since. Not because the machine failed. The machine never failed. Because the machine was never the variable that mattered.